Hi, everybody, and welcome. So, today we are back to the book, and I'm going to skip a lot of the rest of this second chapter and its parts so we can really get into the meat and potatoes of where the true disaster started and possibly where it is going to end. Okay, so to get combat ready and learn the lingo of the army fighter pilots, Harold was sent to Sandringham, where he stayed in a small hotel in Knight's Hill. He practiced every day. It was autumn and there were no tourists and bird watchers, etc. And Harold was happy and enjoyed working with the aircraft. But at the same time, the more he enjoyed his task and training, the more his relationship with Chelsea suffered. Another significant thing is how Harold realized that his father was giving him space. And although he spent time at Sandringham and knew where Harold was staying, he let him get on with it. But one day, when Harold was directing a typhoon craft, Charles came and found Harold in the marshes. He watched Harold work and he praised him. He was obviously very impressed with his son. In 2007, Harold was invited to the 2007 Rugby World Cup semi-final in Paris. He was provided with a driver, and on the first night, he asked the driver to drive him through the tunnel. We spoke about that already, but after going through the tunnel once, Harold asked to go through it one more time. According to Harold, the closure he sought brought him more pain. The driver dropped Harold and his bodyguard off at a bar, and in Harold's own words, he drank and picked fights until he was thrown out. His bodyguards took him to the hotel where he then proceeded to slap his bodyguard. Later, after his bodyguards finally got him to bed, he slipped past them and went out. He spoke to William about going through the tunnel and learned that William had already done that. When William came to Paris for the final, they did it together and for the first time really talked about the accident. They wanted the inquest reopened, but was eventually talked out of it. Now, I'm not going to go into the chapters and chapters of operational detail, but round about part 20 comes a moment when Harold learns that he is to go home from Afghanistan. According to Harold, an Australian newspaper or magazine, I can't remember, had outed him and made it known that he was in Afghanistan. He was extracted. Arriving back in England, he had a short press conference before being met by Charles and William. He had a month off. He met up with friends and phoned Chelsea. She invited him to Cape Town and they took a trip to Botswana. But then they broke up, according to Harold, because Chelsea wanted to be free and wasn't sure she wanted such a public life. He talks about dating Carolyn Flack for a while. He talks about his work and visiting wounded veterans behind the scenes and going back to Botswana once again. At the beginning of 2009, according to Harold, footage he took 2 years prior and which he sent to another cadet circulated amongst others and was finally sold by someone to News of the World. It was the footage in which he called a fellow cadet a little pucky. Charles issued an apology and Harold called Ahmed directly and apologized. In the middle of the controversy, he shipped off to RAF Barkston Heath for flight training. According to Harold, he went through all the medicals and the drug test. From there, he went to RAF Shawbury for helicopter training. At that time, William had found a cottage off base and invited Harold to stay with him. It was also the time in which journalists were arrested for phone hacking. But guess what bothered Harold? They agreed to a joint interview in a hangar at Shawbury, him and William. They were asked how it was living together. William laughed and said Harold was a slob and snored. Harold would have none of it and said it was all lies, but the reporter thought it was part of the good-natured banter, the kind of thing going on between brothers, and the reporter laughed. However, Harold writes that looking back at it now, he wonders whether William had other intentions, obviously thinking William wasn't joking, he was trying to put him down. Harold then went to Botswana once again for his 25th birthday. In May 2010, he finally got his wings. His father pinned it to his chest. Camilla was there, as was Diana's sisters and Chelsea. They were indeed together again, but broke up again soon after. He took a trip with William to Lesotho to visit Sentabali projects, and on the 10th of November 2010, William and Catherine's marriage was announced. Harry talks about the engagement ring and how all the stories about him giving it to William was absolute nonsense, as William had it all along. Harold talks about he always wanted to be a younger dad, unlike his father, who were an older dad. He talks about a trip to Berlin and about his North Pole excursion. And then in part 42, he talks about William and Catherine's wedding. And I want to spend a minute or two on this. He tells how, on the eve of the wedding, he, William, Charles, James, and Thomas had dinner together at Clarence's house. According to Harold, the world was told that he was William's best man, but that William did not want to give him the best man's speech in fear that he would go off script and say something inappropriate. According to Harold, it was a bold-faced lie and just a put on show for the rest of the world, because that is what the royal family thought everyone would expect. Now, I would like to refer you to Angela Levin's biography, in which she wrote the following. According to Angela's book, Harold and Chelsea were broken up at the time, but they were still friends, and therefore she was invited to the wedding. In her biography titled Conversations with the Prince, she detailed how Harold and Chelsea had a conversation about his racier jokes in the speech. Harold called Chelsea and read his speech to her over the phone. She suggested he remove some of the racier anecdotes, including a reference to Catherine's killer legs, as she did not think the Queen would take kindly to his laddish humour. Although Harold listened, attendees at the reception told how Harold still cracked jokes. One told how Harold said William did not have a romantic bone in his body before he met Kate, so I knew it was serious when he suddenly started cooing down the phone at Kate. He also said that Harold's speech was exactly how you would expect a best man's speech to be. Okay, now remember the title of Angela's book, Conversations with the Prince. And these quotes are pretty specific. So who is lying? Did Angela Levin and William and Harold's friends lie? Or is Harold lying now in his own book? Anyway, in Spare, Harold goes on to talk about them plying William with rum and coke to settle his nerves. He tells about telling his father about his frost-nipped ears and cheeks, but not about his frost-nipped penis. He also uses the opportunity to inform us, the readers, that they, William and Harold, were both circumcised. Yeah, like we really had to know that. He tells how they were watching television, and when William saw the crowds outside, he insisted on going out and talking to them. They did not stay long, though, and turned in early. According to Harold, William did not look well the next morning. According to Harold, this was partially due to the fact that he was glum about the uniform he was to wear. According to Harold, William would have preferred to wear his household cavalry frock coat uniform, but Granny said no. As heir, he had to wear the number one ceremonial, namely the bright red uniform of the Irish Guards. According to Harold, William's breath reeked as a result of the previous night's rum, and he offered him some mints. What a nice brother he is. Then Harold launches into this long narrative about Westminster Abbey and how everything in the building spoke of death. So I wonder, why then were they, him and Meghan, upset when told they couldn't marry at Westminster? Anyway, let's move on. He talks about Kate looking lovely and about her being the sister he never had. Now, the next few paragraphs is, to say the least, very perplexing. Remember, Harold said he was not best man and did not give a speech, but that he was merely like a compere. Now, according to Harold, the story that he tested his speech on Chelsea was all horse shit. His word, not mine. Okay, but in his very next paragraph, he writes that he tested some of his lines on JLP, that he told a few jokes about their childhood, read a few snippets from letters of support sent in by the public, told a story about an American bloke who wrote to say he set out to capture a ton of ermine as he wanted to make something special for the Duchess of Cambridge, but unfortunately he only managed to catch two. Still, he made the best of things and cobbled something together from what he had. And then Harold held up the item, a thong. Well, okay, so for the life of me, I do not understand what Harold was on about then. That is exactly what a best man is supposed to do. According to Harold, as the room laughed, he had the clearest vision of Mummy laughing at his ermine story. After this, he goes into great detail about seeing a doctor about his painful todger. Yep, 2 pages of fine print on Harold's todger. Well, the doctor could not see anything, and by the sound of it, yes, I indeed consulted Dr. Google. It does not sound like frost nip either, at least not from the North Pole type of snow. But, he still had the Elizabeth Arden cream his mommy put on her lips to put down there. So all's well that ends well. He then talks about a girl he dated called Florence for a while, but she dumped him for an ex-boyfriend. Then he goes through a lengthy description of a training camp he had in America. After that, he got a call from the Queen informing him she wanted him to do a 2-week tour of the Caribbean. The tour went well and he got good reviews. In the meantime, Harold was waiting for his orders to go back to Afghanistan. Then he met Cressida, but was interrupted by his mates reminding him of their plan to go to Las Vegas. Okay, what happened in Las Vegas is old news, really. Harold was snapped naked after losing a game of pool, and one of the girls in attendance actually sold the photograph. Harold waited to hear who would give him the heave-ho first, the army or Cressida. So he fled to his family in Scotland, and Charles was more bemused than anything else. Charles said he felt for Harold. He had been through these type of scandals himself, but at least he had not been naked on the front page before, which, of course, was not true. On September 7th, 1994, a German newspaper published a photograph of the then 45-year-old Charles standing naked, toweling off in front of an open window of a friend's chateau in the south of France. The chateau belonged to Baroness Louise de Waldner. The army, however, did not concern themselves with the photograph of the naked Harold either, and in September 2012, Harold left for Afghanistan again. Okay, my dears, so I'm going to skip Harold's detailed descriptions of his kills. Yes, indeed, the tally of 25 was not the only detail in the book. And although I did indeed read through it, it is not in my nature to discuss, not on YouTube or anywhere else. But suffice it to say, it was fairly detailed. Okay, I'm also going to leave this here for now. I am going to skip the rest of part 2 as I want to get on with what Harold wrote about his relationship with Meghan. Now, I'm going to do it differently from what I have been doing so far. I'm going to use the book as a guideline to bring you all the receipts I had gathered over the last few years. Now, some of it you may have seen already in my previous videos, but like a lot of people coming out now and telling their versions of their stories, I also have things which I have not made public. Maybe because I couldn't verify it, maybe because I felt a little embarrassed, maybe because I was too afraid to. So some of it, like I said, you may have seen and heard about, and some of it you won't. So that's what we're going to do in the next video. So, my dear friends, as always, until then, please take good care of yourselves. Bye.